part of the specialization of labor that's necessary to deliver the kind of goods and services that we can do in the modern world in the 21st century. Yeah, and if you decide I'm going to stay smart, I'm going to build relationships, you're going to win. When they go to the business and say, who are our guys that you like the most? And they're going to say, that guy over there. And it's the guy with the best relationships.
Yeah, there you go.
And look, something else too, guys. We're going to talk more about this in a little bit. This is going to be a long cast because Mike and I have a couple of war stories we want to share that are really trenchant and frankly dramatic in Mike's case. But one of the mistakes that internal support providers make is the belief that their job is to protect the resources. Okay. Now, that's not to say that is not important. It is, but it is so much less important than you realize that when you throw that requirements document out there and the vocabulary you use is all about saying you can't do this. You have to say, my job is to say no and put the filter way at the top. So the only thing that come in.
It's a defense. You get the requirements document is almost like creating a lot of folks don't mean it this way. It certainly comes across this way. It's creating a fence, an obstacle between the customer and your services that is so high that just by the fact of having it, you're going to weed out 95% of the projects out there.
And they think it's good.
And it's not.
And the customers hate it.
They hate it.
Now, and they say, well, I'm protecting my resources. Yes, but protecting your resources is not one of your top 5 priorities.
At what cost?
Do you remember the client that we talked to a couple of years ago who told us the CIO is putting in a PMO? There's too many things coming in. And so the CIO went to the CEO and actually said, now all the projects that come from the business have to go through my PMO. Can you just see the CEO in that meeting raising one eyebrow and going like, really? It's fine. You can have them all until I decide it's really important. And then I'm going right around your PMO and I'm going to take the resources I need to get what I want. And the CIO is probably thinking, I built a system, you can't get in. And the CEO goes, I'll trump you whenever I want to. It's just dumb. And look, don't fight a battle you can't win. And if the business really wants something and you're putting up all kinds of roadblocks and a manager wants it and you think you outrank her and she goes to the VP and the VP comes over and says, I'm tired of this. You guys, you support us. This is within your budget. I want it done. And now you've lost and you've totally damaged the relationship. Yeah. So the customer says, I get this requirements document. Wait a minute. I thought you guys work for us. And I'm requesting something you and immediately say, no. You gotta go jump through all this hoops. Immediately, relationship problem. And that relationship problem continues through that entire process. Exactly. It's just terrible. So the first rule, this is so important. You cannot start out with a fence of a requirements document. You can't. We're telling you, stop that now. And have an approach of when there's a request from the business, okay? When there's a request from the business, your first thought is, I'm going to go collaborate with them in a subordinate role. I'm going to go collaborate with them in order to figure out what they need and try to figure out what I can do for them. That's the approach to have. Okay? All right. So then the question becomes, right? How do they do that? Right? So how do we help the customer create parameters and define needs? Look, you're a professional. If you're in a support role, you're an expert, okay? You want to be seen as an expert, okay? So I'll be the bad guy. You want me to be the bad guy? I'll be the bad guy. We're going to be direct, and I'm going to be candid. If you want to be seen as an expert, as a professional, start acting that way, okay? And professionals and experts don't react with, it can't be done until you force me to do it because I have resources. Let me take a minute here, and I'm probably going to get some emails about this, but let me just tell you a story.
So unusual.
Okay? Yeah. A professional is there to have their services used, to help the customer get what the customer wants, okay? The professional is not there to force the customer through a series of hoops. Now, the professional should not. We don't recommend the professional engage in behaviors that would make them be perceived as unprofessional by other people in their expertise. We're not asking you to roll over and do whatever it is the business wants. We're simply asking you to have an approach which is not the approach the vast majority of internal support providers have today. We're recommending your approach is, I'm going to try to help you do this well.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is where
and by the way, if you start that way, if you start the relationship that way, and you find out that the requirements are set to you don't have the resource, it can't be done, and you're having a conversation. So, okay, then it can become a conversation of, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
And then they're thankful that at least you can do that. But if you start the other way,
what happens is you get trumped and you're going to be forced to do what they want because they don't like the fact that you could put your hand up right in the very beginning. They look at you like, what? I mean, really? The 80-page decks? 80-page requirement deck. And they say, well, once you answer these series of questions, I'll be able to get back to you.
Then I start.
I'm confused. I thought you worked for me. And the IT person, no, I don't work for you. I work for the CIO. Yeah, well, the CIO is the least most powerful of the C-suite guys, and the chief marketing officer is definitely more powerful than him. And it ends up being it's a pissing contest.
Right. And the great CIOs understand that.
Yeah. All right. So here's what happened. We were at the conference, and we were doing the Zim koan, the delegation koan, and the point was brought up that one of the ways that internal support providers respond to a new deliverable, a new ball being dropped on their head, was to say no.
Right.
And if you're in IT, folks, and this is about all internal support providers. If you're in HR, if you're in finance, if you're in logistics and you support a business that sells products and services and so on, you could be in a support role. In IT, we see this a lot because because companies are becoming more and more computerized, and the use of data and the speed at which systems, electronic and computer systems, digital systems transformed our workplace in the last 30 years is really breathtaking. Here's what's happened. The IT people, years ago, before IT was a strategic advantage, it was really just a place where we did basic computing. We could speed up some back office things. Because IT wasn't understood, because the computer stuff wasn't understood, and I come by this knowledge the hard way. My dad worked on some of the original IBM 360s years ago in the 1960s. Gigantic mainframes. You'd walk into the room and you'd have to go up a step. And not only that, but the ceiling was lower, and it was all air conditioning. There was a whole floor that was nothing but computers, big tape machines and the whole thing, punch cards, batch processing, the whole thing.
The good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. Exactly right. And the whole point of it back then was this is a resource we can use to speed up some of the stuff we do in the back office, to give us more data, to help us make better decisions. Senior executives didn't understand it at all, couldn't do it. It was literally like magic what computers could do. But they knew that they had to request resources and so on. The early managers and leaders in the IT world began to see that there were too many requests for their resources. They couldn't hire programmers fast enough. And back in the beginning, there weren't enough programmers in the world. I mean, there just weren't programmers. I mean, in the 1940s and 50s, people weren't graduating from schools in droves with computing degrees.
Right, you go to Juilliard to get a programmer.
Yeah. So what happened was the management of one type of internal resource provider, IT, which wasn't even called IT back then, they would get defensive about it, more requests. And the way they developed it, these were all people that were mathematicians and had gotten into computing. And they began to discover that they could figure out numbers, hours of work that it took to do a certain thing.
So many lines of code, right?
So many lines of code. And a typical programmer could write this many lines of code. And a typical module, for instance, in Fortran or COBOL or something like that, was this many lines. And so a module, this was before they even talked about modules, of course, would take 11 man hours. And the idea is in the beginning, and by the way, if you've never read the book A Mythical Man Month, you ought to read it about IBM and putting more people on a project. The IT managers early in the day of IT began to believe that the solution to request was to do math, a mechanistic math problem, to solve the problem of we have this much work to do and we only have this many people. And they developed the belief that they could say no. In other words, we only have 8 of us down here. We're doing this many jobs. You could do the math. I can only write so much code. You're asking me to write this much code. Literally, we have a book-to-bill ratio that we literally can't support the kind of requests. We have our own little factory here inside the company, and you have too much demand and we have not enough supply. And we would love to do more, but we can't work 24 hours a day. We have to sleep. We have to eat. And by the way, it was good for them, but their response was to make it about math. Now, what most IT people don't realize is that's how your industry started, and lots of managers and leaders and executives still have the basic belief that I know how many man hours I have, and I know how many man hours it takes to do X, Y, Z. There are books that are written, reference books that say, this is how many people it takes to do X and Y and Z. Those books are going away now, but there's still plenty of IT executive leadership and management that believes in this mechanistic, let's add up the number of people and the number of hours, and our estimate is that'll take 1,050 man hours, and that takes this many guys, and my guys are already at 84% utilization rate, and I literally don't have the people. And they would go back to the business and they would say, I'm sorry, we can't support that. And because the business, this is years ago, the business didn't understand it, the business said, oh, okay. Because they literally knew they couldn't do it themselves, and it was this magic that these technical guys did in the background. What a lot of people in the IT world don't understand is no one else does that.
Yeah.
When legal is told we have this to be done and we only have 5 lawyers, all the lawyers know, I'll just have to work harder. When finance is told we got a new thing, we got a new subsidiary and you got to do taxes for them, it's not like we hire 20 more guys. It's no, figure out how to do what you used to do in 80% of your time, not 100%. Do that in 80% because now 20% is going to be spent on this new subsidiary.
Well, it's kind of like we were talking at lunch today about oil and technology and capitalism, the idea that that it's not a zero-sum game, that there's not really a great lack of resources, a lack of ingenuity. In the same way, that thinking there suggests, well, I have these requirements, it's this number of function points,
static.
This number of lines of code,
right.
It's static, and it doesn't incite people to get creative about ways of doing things, right?
Literally, the moment you believe that resource is static, management ceases to exist. It literally, you become cogs in a machine. You mentioned oil. The whole idea of, we don't have any more oil. Well, no, actually, the oil we found is based on what we researched, what exploration we were willing to do when oil was at $40 a barrel.
Right.
When oil's at $100 a barrel, we can now use extraction techniques that cost twice as much. It costs $80 a barrel. And suddenly, we can find more oil. Same thing is true in management. When we're all working full time, and then somebody says we have to do more, the manager's job is to say, how can we do what we used to do in a little bit less time so we can add this new thing? It's fungible. Labor is, to a degree, fungible. Now, a lot of people are going to write us and say, this is true. And this is one of those rare casts where you and I, again, are together. You're here in my house in Fredericksburg. And this is one of those casts, somebody's going to write and say, well, it's not that fungible and we're all really, really busy. Look, folks, we're not going to argue with you. Your folks are busy. Everybody's busy. And let me tell you something else. People have been busy in their jobs since the beginning of time. Busyness is not a defense against more work. What happens is you're busy and then you get more work and you discover that work, hopefully, is more valuable than the work you're doing. And you figure out how to do the work you're doing in less time or potentially delegate that work if you're a manager to free up time for the thing that is now more valuable.
I don't know if we ever shared this story with you before, but many, I must have been 20 years ago, I was doing work, and I was doing work on Wall Street for the company I worked for, wasn't MCI, for a company that I was working for, building risk management models, credit risk management, and foreign exchange risk management, right? And I was working with this company, and I was representative of the company. We had an outside firm developing the software.
And you were doing foreign exchange because the product that your company made was affected by fluctuation.
I was supporting a trading desk.
They were trading raw materials.
Right, because we had, billions of dollars exposed to foreign exchange risk.
Yeah.
And so we hired this firm to build this very, very custom, very, very complex foreign exchange risk system. So I'm the representative of the company with this third party. I'm on Wall Street. I'm literally working on Wall Street every day, building this software. And there are a few other people involved, but Lloyd Zussman. Lloyd, probably not listen to this, but Lloyd is a very smart guy. And we sat down to start coding this stuff, right? And he had a piece of it, and I had a piece of it.
Right.
And then 2 weeks into it, I had one of the modules developed. He had nothing. Right. 3 weeks into it, I had another module developed. He had nothing. 4 weeks into it, I had another module. So I had 3 or 4 modules by that point developed. He had nothing. The next week, I had 5 done. The next week, he had 25 done.
What?
He had 25 done. You know what he did? He thought about it and said, okay, there is not enough time for me to do all this. It was a very, very tight project. Right. And he thought differently, creatively, about how he could go about his work differently. And so what he did, he built essentially a code generation engine. He feed in the parameters, and then